12 engineers stood around a $500,000 engine, sweat soaking through their shirts, and not one of them could make it turn over. "Where is he?" the old man in the doorway asked quietly. "Where is Daniel?" Nobody answered him. Because 3 weeks earlier, they had thrown Daniel Reyes out of this same garage like he was nothing. Welcome back to Grandpa's Story Chair. If you believe in kindness and second chances, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. It truly helps this old chair keep telling stories that matter. Before we begin, pull up a seat next to me. Tell me in the comments which country you're watching from and what city I read every single one. And I love knowing how far these stories travel to reach you. Now, let's go back to the beginning. Before the engineers, before the billionaire in the doorway, back to a small garage on the edge of town, where a single father named Daniel Reyes was just trying to get through another ordinary Tuesday, not knowing that everything he'd built and everything he was about to lose would come down to one engine that only his hands remembered how to wake up. This is his story. Daniel Reyes was 42 years old, and his hands told the story of every one of those years. Scarred knuckles, permanent grease lines in the creases of his palms that no amount of soap could ever fully lift. A callus on his right thumb shaped exactly like the socket wrench he'd used for 15 years at Whitlock Motors, the kind of high-end restoration garage that rich men brought their forgotten classics to when nobody else could bring them back to life. He lived in a small rented house on Maple Street with his daughter, Emma, who is 9 years old and missing her 2 front teeth and absolutely certain that her father could fix anything in the entire world. Even a spaceship, she'd ask him once, over cereal, her feet not quite touching the kitchen floor. "If it's got an engine," Daniel had said, "give me enough time and I'll figure it out." She'd believed him completely. Kids usually did. Daniel's wife had passed away when Emma was 4, a car accident on a rainy night that Daniel still couldn't drive past without his hands tightening on the wheel. Since then, it had been just the two of them. Pancakes on Sunday mornings. Homework spread across the kitchen table while a pot of spaghetti simmered on the stove. A single lamp left on in the hallway every night, because Emma still didn't love the dark. Money was tight, but it was steady. Whitlock Motors paid him well, because Daniel wasn't just any mechanic. He was the one they called when a car's engine hadn't turned over in 30 years, and the owner refused to hear the word unfixable. He'd restored a 1958 Mercedes for a retired senator. He'd brought a rusted-out Shelby back from the dead for a man who cried when he heard it start. Old Mr. Whitlock, who'd founded the garage 40 years ago, used to say that Daniel didn't fix engines, he talked to them. "Every engine's got a memory," Daniel told Emma once, letting her sit on his knee in the driver's seat of some forgotten old car. "You just gotta listen for what it's trying to tell you." Every morning, Daniel dropped Emma at school at 7:45, kissed the top of her head, and told her the same thing he always told her: "Be brave today. I'll see you at 5. Then he'd drive the 14 minutes to the garage, put on his coveralls with rays stitched over the left pocket, and disappear under the hood of someone else's problem until it became his. It was a small life, a quiet one, but it was his, and it was enough. A roof, a routine, a daughter who thought he could fix anything, including maybe the hole her mother had left behind. Daniel didn't know it yet, but old Mr. Whitlock had been sick for months, and in 6 weeks, everything about that small, steady life was going to change, starting the day Mr. Whitlock's son walked through the garage doors for the first time in years, wearing a suit that cost more than Daniel made in a month, and looking at the place like he already owned it, which, soon enough, he would. His name was Marcus Whitlock Jr., and he'd spent the last 10 years in the city building software companies, not fixing cars. When his father's health forced a sale of control, Marcus came home holding a business degree, a modernization plan, and very little patience for a garage full of men who still measured things by hand. "This place is bleeding money on labor costs," Marcus said during his first walkthrough, loud enough for half the shop to hear. "We've got guys here who've been doing the same job the same way since before I was born." Daniel kept his head down and kept working. He'd learned a long time ago that men like Marcus rarely wanted a conversation, they wanted an audience. But 3 weeks later, Marcus called a meeting. "We're bringing in a new engineering team," he announced. 12 specialists, trained on modern diagnostic systems, certified on everything from classic restorations to experimental prototypes. We're rebuilding this garage into something that belongs in this century. Someone in the back asked the question everyone was thinking. And us? Marcus's smile didn't reach his eyes. Some roles will transition out. Will be restructuring. Daniel felt his stomach drop, but he told himself the same thing he always told himself when the world got uncertain. Keep your head down, do the work, and let the work speak. For a while, it seemed to. The 12 engineers arrived in matching polos, degrees from good schools, laptops that could diagnose a modern engine's entire nervous system in 90 seconds. They were smart, genuinely. But 2 weeks in, something became obvious that none of them wanted to admit out loud. None of their machines could talk to old iron. There was a black 1967 Roadster in Bay 3, a private client's car, untouched for a decade, and the 12 engineers spent 4 days running diagnostics that came back blank again and again because the vehicle predated every system their tools were built to read. Daniel walked past on his lunch break, glanced at the open hood for maybe 6 seconds, and said, quietly, to no one in particular, "Check the distributor cap. It's cracked on the underside. You won't see it unless you pull it." One of the younger engineers, a woman named Priya, actually checked. It was cracked, exactly where he said. Marcus didn't like that story getting around the shop. 2 weeks later, Daniel found an envelope on his workbench where his tools should have been. After 15 years of service, Whitlock Motors is restructuring its technical staff. It read, "Your position has been eliminated, effective immediately." No conversation, no warning beyond the meeting, just a letter and a box someone had already packed for him, his coveralls folded on top, rays facing up, like even the box knew whose name belonged in this building. Daniel stood in the parking lot for a long moment before he got in his truck. He thought about Emma, about rent due on the 14th, about 15 years of engines that had trusted his hands. He didn't cry. He just sat there, hands on the wheel, the same way he did every time he drove past the intersection where he'd lost his wife quiet and a little bit broken, and determined not to let his daughter see it. That night, he told Emma the truth, because he'd promised her a long time ago that he never wouldn't. "I lost my job today, sweetheart." Emma looked up from her math homework, her missing front teeth showing when her mouth opened in surprise. "But you're the best fixer there is." "Sometimes," Daniel said, pulling her into a hug, "being the best isn't the thing people are looking for." What Daniel didn't know, what nobody at Whitlock Motors knew yet, was that 6 days after he was let go, a call came into the garage from a man named Richard Voss. Richard Voss owned an aerospace and automotive holding company worth more than most small countries' GDP. He was quiet, private, almost never photographed, and he was calling about one specific project, the restoration of a 1962 experimental engine, one of only 3 ever built, worth an estimated $2 million on its own, a piece his own late father had spent his final years trying to bring back to life. "I was told your team handles impossible engines," Voss said over the phone, his voice calm and unreadable. "I want your best person on it. Whoever handled the Shelby restoration 3 years ago. Whoever fixed the '58 Mercedes for Senator Hale." Marcus, sitting in his father's old office chair, smiled and said exactly what he thought Voss wanted to hear. "That would be our engineering division, sir. 12 of the best specialists in the country." He didn't mention the name Daniel Reyes even once. He didn't know not yet that it was the only name that mattered. The engine arrived on a Tuesday, wrapped and crated like something from a museum, and for 3 days, the 12 engineers worked in shifts around the clock. Nothing. Every diagnostic came back clean, every part tested within spec, and still, the engine wouldn't turn over, not a cough, not a flicker, nothing but dead silence every time someone reached for the ignition. By day 4, Marcus was pacing the garage floor, checking his phone every few minutes, because Richard Voss had made one thing very clear. He was flying in personally to see the engine run. "It has to start today," Marcus said for the 4th time that morning. "Do you understand what this contract is worth to us? Do you understand who is walking through that door in 6 hours?" Priya, The young engineer who'd once watched Daniel diagnose a cracked distributor cap in 6 seconds finally said the thing she'd been holding back for days. "Mr. Whitlock, I think we need Daniel." Marcus's jaw tightened. "We are not calling him back. With respect, sir, none of us have worked on anything this old. He restored engines like this for 15 years. This isn't about ego. It's about—" I said no. At 3:47 p.m., a black car pulled into the garage lot, and Richard Voss stepped out. He wasn't what anyone expected. No entourage. No flash. Just a tall, gray-haired man in a simple coat, walking with the unhurried calm of someone who had never once needed to prove anything to anybody. He walked straight to the engine, past the 12 engineers standing at attention, and rested his hand on the cold metal casing the way you'd rest a hand on an old friend's shoulder. "Has it run yet?" he asked. Marcus stepped forward, the practiced smile already in place. "We're in the final diagnostic stages, sir. Our team is—" "I didn't ask about your team," Voss said quietly. "I asked if it's run." Silence. "No, sir," Marcus finally admitted. "Not yet." Voss nodded slowly, like he'd expected the answer. Then he asked the question that changed everything. "Where is Daniel Reyes?" Marcus blinked. "I'm sorry?" "Daniel Reyes," Voss repeated. "He restored a Shelby for a friend of mine 3 years ago. Grown men don't cry over engines often, Marcus, but my friend did, the day that car started. I asked for your best person by name. I just didn't know his name at the time. I do now. Where is he?" The color drained from Marcus's face. "Mr. Reyes is no longer with the company. You let him go. We restructured our—" "Where is he?" Voss asked again. And this time his voice wasn't loud, but it filled the entire garage. "Right now." Nobody moved for a long, humiliating moment. Then Priya, quietly, gave Voss the truth Marcus wouldn't. "He lives about 15 minutes from here, sir. Maple Street." Voss looked at Marcus with something that wasn't anger. It was worse than anger. It was disappointment. "Call him," Voss said. "Ask him to come. Tell him Richard Voss is asking personally. And tell him I'll pay whatever his time is worth. And Marcus, if he says no, I'll understand completely. Men usually don't come running back to the people who threw them away." 40 minutes later, a familiar truck pulled into the lot. Daniel stepped out slowly, still in the flannel shirt he'd been wearing at home. Emma's math homework still folded in his jacket pocket from checking it that morning. He looked at the garage he'd given 15 years of his life to, and for a moment, something in his jaw tightened. Then he saw the engine. He walked past Marcus without a word, past the 12 engineers whose faces had shifted from exhaustion to something closer to hope. He stopped in front of the 62 experimental engine and simply looked at it the way he used to look at Emma's crayon drawings, like it was already telling him a story. "Cold soaked overnight?" Daniel asked, to no one in particular. 3 nights, Priya answered. "They test the fuel delivery under low temp pressure? Or just at room temp readings?" Silence. Nobody had thought to. Daniel reached into the engine bay, felt along a line with 2 fingers, and nodded slowly to himself. "There's your problem. Pressure differential's throwing every sensor a false reading. It's not broken. It's cold. It just needs someone to warm it up right and give it a minute to remember how to breathe." 12 engineers, 3 degrees each on average, watched a man in a flannel shirt solve in 90 seconds what they'd failed to solve in 4 days. Richard Voss stood at the edge of the bay, arms crossed, watching Daniel's hands move with a kind of reverence most people saved for something sacred. "Try it now," Daniel said, stepping back. Marcus, hands shaking slightly, turned the key. The engine roared to life on the first try. A deep, steady, powerful sound that rolled through the garage like thunder, finally breaking after a long stretch of silence. Somebody started clapping. Then, several people. Richard Voss didn't clap. He just walked over to Daniel, extended his hand, and said the words that would change everything. 15 years he worked for you, Voss said, turning to Marcus, not letting go of Daniel's hand. And you let him walk out with a box under his arm. I don't do business with people who throw away their best assets to save a line item. There was no shouting after that. No dramatic revenge. No public shaming beyond what Marcus had already brought on himself in that one long, silent moment. Richard Voss simply said quietly that he'd be taking his contract and every future contract to wherever Daniel Reyes worked. Nowhere else. Marcus understood what that meant without needing it spelled out. By the following week, Daniel was back at the garage, not as an employee this time, but as the head of a new restoration division built specifically around him, with Priya and two of the other engineers asking, humbly, if they could learn from him instead of trying to replace him. Daniel said yes, not because he needed to prove anything, but because somewhere along the way, he'd learned that the best thing you can do with someone who wronged you is give them a real chance to become better and let your work, quietly, be the only argument you ever need to make. Marcus never became a villain in the story. He became, slowly and awkwardly, a student standing at the edge of bay, 3 some afternoons, watching Daniel's hands move across an old engine, finally understanding what his own father had always tried to tell him, that some kinds of knowledge don't come from a certification. They come from 15 years of listening. At home, nothing about Daniel's life changed in any dramatic way. He still made pancakes on Sunday mornings. He still checked Emma's math homework at the kitchen table while dinner simmered on the stove. He still left the hallway lamp on every night. But one evening, a few weeks later, Emma looked up from her homework and asked him, "Dad, did you fix that really big, expensive engine?" "I did," Daniel said. "Were you scared when they didn't want you anymore?" Daniel thought about it for a moment, the way he always did before he answered her honestly. "A little," he admitted. "But I figured out something a long time ago, sweetheart. People can take your job. They can take your title, your desk, even the box your things came in. But they can't take the thing you actually know how to do. That stays with you. And sooner or later, the right person comes looking for exactly that." Emma nodded slowly, the way kids do when they're filing something away to understand better later. Then she went back to her math homework, completely certain once again that her father really could fix anything in the world. And in a quiet way, she wasn't wrong. This story isn't really about an engine. It's about how easy it is, in this world, to look at someone quiet and steady and mistake their humility for something replaceable. It's about how real value doesn't announce itself. It waits patiently in the hands of people who show up every day and do the work without needing applause for it. And it's a reminder that kindness, decency, and quiet mastery are never truly gone, even when the world tries to box them up and set them out the door. Sooner or later, someone always comes looking for the real thing. If this story touched your heart, please leave a like and share it with someone who still believes kindness matters. And before you go, comment below. Kindness still exists. If you believe even one good act can change someone's life. Thank you for sitting with me a little while longer in Grandpa's story chair. I'll see you in the next one.